Joining us now is the motor trade expert Fraser Brown. Fraser, it's interesting looking at these sales figures. There was a big, perhaps hype loop last year and the year before on EVs, on electric vehicles. But perhaps we've reached a plateau and everyone that wanted one has maybe saturated that market more than was expected.
It is very interesting. Obviously, we've seen a 10% rise in the market, so the number of vehicles registered this month. Very interestingly, March is one of the plate change months, and it's one of our biggest registration months in the calendar year. So the figures that come out in March are particularly useful and gives a very good indication as to what's really going on. Now, there are two things that hide beneath the headlines from these figures. The first thing is that we're seeing very weak retail demand. So the private buyer in the market isn't coming out. They're really hard to find, and manufacturers are having to spend a lot of money to kind of register, to get cars registered. They're putting an awful lot of discounts on the table at the moment. And we're finally seeing a push of vehicles into the market rather than a pull from customers. We've had issues with semiconductors and various other things, so they've not been supplying cars from manufacturers as fast since the pandemic. We now seem to be over that. Manufacturers are pushing cars into the market again. And yeah, there's another underlying story around EVs as well.
Yes, Fraser, with the electric vehicles, they've had a bit of bad press, haven't they, recently, over the last year or so? People talking about how electric vehicles could blow up or go up in flames. I mean, we've seen buses go up in flames, haven't we?
No more than every regular car.
We've seen quite prominent commentators, journalists coming out to say they regret buying their electric vehicle for various reasons. Is that fair? And do you think that's impacting these sales?
Well, I have absolutely no doubt the negative press around EVs, a lot of it is completely untrue. Statistics on vehicle fires show that an EV is 10 times less likely to set fire than an internal combustion engine. That's industry-wide and insurance company-based figures. And the other thing to remember, I've lived with an electric vehicle for 7 years now, OK? And I have only used public charging very few times. In an average year, I might use it a handful of times, because the best time to charge an electric car is overnight. And every morning your car's full. So if you buy a car that does 300 miles, which is fairly standard for an electric car these days, you never go near public charging. So public charging infrastructure, whilst not completely irrelevant, is not a major issue. And 60% of drivers have access to domestic overnight charging. We can fill a car that will do 300 miles up with about £7 worth of electricity. You go out and buy a petrol car, and it might cost you, depending on how efficient it is and how large the car is, that might cost you £80 or £100 to fill that vehicle up. So whilst electric cars, as new cars, are slightly more expensive than their internal combustion engine counterparts, an electric car to run is massively cheaper. Your average person...
Will it be for that long, though, Fraser? Will it be for that long? They'll find other ways of taxing you, won't they? They'll find other ways when they run out of the petrol and diesel money.
Potentially, but the key issue is that electricity overnight is really cheap because we can't use it. You know, they have streetlights over on the M62 motorway on overnight to use up the electricity that has to be generated, because you can't turn power stations off overnight. They have to produce a base load. So why not use that electricity in cars rather than wasting it in other ways?
It's a very good point. And if anyone with a smart meter can see just how much cheaper electricity is at 3 in the morning compared to 6 in the afternoon. But Fraser Brown, thank you so much for coming on and talking us through that.